The Soviet Union. It's so great, the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or which is said in Russian, I can't remember, but it's a really long phrase. I used to know it, I cannot remember it. I used to know.
Oh, wait, do we need the map thingy?
Time out. In terms of Venn diagram, you can have it out, but I guess you can kind of keep track, but you won't obviously know what to, fill it in till later. So if you don't have it right now, you're fine. You'll probably want to take other notes to then move into there to do the actual comparison.
Can I go to my notebook?
Sure, go ahead. Where was I? Oh, yes. So, today we talk about Soviet Union. Glorious Soviet Union and all its gloriously glory. Or as it was known, let's get this. Yeah. That's right. I can never get it. Yeah.
Well, now you're going to throw a spider.
But yeah. I tried to find. I can't remember. But yeah, okay. So, I record lectures, so you know. Alright. So, Soviets have defeated the Tsar. Communism has come. Everyone happy-go-lucky now. Alright. So, let's take a look at it under Lenin. As I said, Lenin's a little different than Marx. He believed in what you see as the following, which was different than Marx, that there was a revolutionary leadership. Instead of it being like a giant movement of the masses, those at the front would do it. There's another key idea, the doctrine of permanent revolution. The idea that the revolution would just continue on pretty much during the whole socialist phase until the whole world became communist. And the idea that the state could be the tool for it. But yeah, so how do we know, how is this an example of totalitarianism? Like I said, you can maybe start doing the Venn diagram now, but I kind of doubt it. But at least take notes for now so you can then use them. But one of the things to know about it, it was a single-party state. What that means is that no other parties are allowed, and that's very common in dictatorships. In fact, a little spoiler alert, all three of these systems of government will eventually only allow one single party. In this case, it was the Bolshevik Party, which became the Communist Party. Bolshevik meaning the majority, which they never were, ironically. How'd it go? Not so well. All right, in 1918, 1921, you had what was called war communism. This was their attempt to really become communists. Massive collectivization. So getting rid of private property and forming collective farms. Confiscating property. And it's all part of what's known as the New Economic Plan of Lenin in 1921, which was nationalization, taking over things. It was not popular. People did not like it. They wanted peace, land, and bread, but they didn't want to lose what they did have. And you can see it backfires with a massive famine at this time from 1920 1921. It's hard to say how many people died in this famine. It's true with any famine, but especially hard with this one because I don't think statistics were ever quoted that well. In the early 1920s, an official Soviet document said 5 million people died in 1921 from famine or famine-related diseases. Some said it was only a mere million, but on the other side, it could have been up to 10 million people died in one of the worst famines. It was bad. People literally starving to death, large families without food. You can see they're living in the beginning of the bread lines in the Soviet Union, food not being common. You can see people literally starving to death in the streets of it. And if you're hungry, you could sell severed heads for people to eat. But yeah, times weren't good. But yeah, there we go. The new economic plan, or this is the new economic plan. So Lenin realizes, okay, we're going to have to take a step back. So Lenin actually backs off of communism at this point and puts in this mixture of capitalism and socialism. He allows some private industry and some private farming, not a whole lot. small businessmen were allowed. And the idea is, okay, this will be our temporary plan. Let the economy recover from the World War I and the Civil War, and then we can move forward. The idea is, look, we're taking one step backwards away from the communist glory of the future. But we might have taken one step backwards, but this will help us take 2 steps forward. So the idea is they're moving forward. This will not last long under Lenin because Lenin himself will not last long. He soon gets sick in 1920, I can't remember the year, 21, 22, 23, something like that. And you can see here after he had a massive stroke, doesn't do well, and eventually he will die. And for those of you who want to go visit Lenin, you can go to Lenin's tomb. There you go. 1924, he dies after a stroke in 1922. Yeah, that's him. You can go to Moscow right now and go stare at Lenin, and he looks like that. Good for Lenin. Yeah.
Wait, like that's his actual body?
That's him. Yeah. All nice and preserved.
Wait, how did they
No,
keep him like
that's him. Yeah, it's really well preserved. It's kind of mummified in a way, and in a very airtight, like light controlled room. So, but you can go look at Lenin, and then you can go, hey, guess what? I had Starbucks across the street. Capitalism. So, yeah. Well, not anymore, thanks to Putin. Now we can't go get Starbucks. But here's the thing. They give him this tomb and they embalm him. Why would they do that? Because they are now doing what to kind of him?
Make fun of him?
Or no, it's kind of worshiping him. This is what we call a cult of the personality. This sense of like he is like a godlike figure. I mean, you saw it in the paintings. In fact, they preserved the body. Which is weird because Lenin might not have liked it. Remember, Lenin was a strict anti-religious person as a communist. He hated all superstitions. Yet he's kind of being worshipped. Why do you think this happens? Why do these cult of personalities develop? What do you think that is? Why do we do this? Even like with people like Lenin who might not have liked it. Or John Lennon, who probably would have liked it. Yeah.
Because they want to follow something that they still remember, but they want to change it to their personal preference.
There's something to that? Yeah.
Yeah, kind of what I'm saying.
Yeah, it's definitely something seems natural in us. But yeah, you can see this happen. St. Petersburg becomes Petrograd, and after this it becomes Leningrad, for example. So Lenin is dead. And there's going to be this struggle for power between these 2 top leaders, Trotsky and some guy named Stalin. I don't know. All right, we're going to take a time out here. I'm going to show you guys a video on Trotsky. For the recording, it's not going to show up. You can just listen to it in the background. So that'll be for the next couple of minutes. So
Stalin has something to do with the car messing up.
yeah, that's right.
Used to Leninville, is Stalin a good guy?
He fought Hitler? That's, there's a 6-year window where Americans can like him.
Moonwalk original?
Yeah, we were discussing
Michael Jackson?
we were discussing the 80s in U.S. history, all right? In the U.S. history, you get to this point, you discuss the 1980s, all right? So there you go.
Dude, I know a lot about you.
I was there. I win. All right, here we go.
Russian Marxist revolutionary Leon Trotsky was born Lev Davidovich Vronsky on November 7, 1879 in the Ukraine to prosperous Jewish farmer parents. As a young man, Trotsky spread the ideals of socialism and tried to unionize Russian workers.
There was fairly widespread support for change, and he was inspired by socialist message. He was sort of taking measures to overcome what had been a very inequitable social system.
It was at this time that he became acquainted with fellow revolutionary Vladimir Lenin.
It was inevitable that an ambitious and intelligent young socialist in Russia, as Trotsky was, would come into contact with the ideas and eventually the person of Lenin sooner or later. And once they did, they forged this lifetime relationship.
Lenin was a leader of the Bolsheviks who rose to power during the October Revolution in 1917. Trotsky joined the Bolsheviks right before the revolution and became a leader within the party.
Trotsky was one of the most important figures in the Russian Revolution, second only to Lenin in his charisma, his mobilizing, organizing capacities, and second only to Lenin in his revolutionary fervor.
power, they were immediately besieged on all sides.
The so-called whites, the monarchists, the liberals, as well as the foreign interventionists, all wanted to overturn the revolution. So the Bolsheviks had to immediately create an army. Somebody had to create a new army, and that somebody was Trotsky.
In 1920, after 3 years of fighting, Trotsky's Red Army won the Russian Civil War for the Bolsheviks, who united the country as the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, or the USSR. Trotsky's longtime friend and Soviet leader Vladimir Lenin died in 1924, and a power struggle began for the right to succeed him.
Trotsky was the favorite candidate because he was the best known. He was at Lenin's side at those key moments in the Civil War. Nobody was more important to the Soviet victory and support of Lenin than Trotsky.
Joseph Stalin, the General Secretary of the Communist Party, also made a play for Lenin's vacated seat.
Lenin would only trust Stalin with party appointments. But precisely that job, the clever Stalin understood, allowed him to build up a growing base of support, of loyalists, of people that when he called on them, would remember what they owed him and vote the way he told them.
In 1924, Joseph Stalin became the de facto leader of the Soviet Union. By 1927, Leon Trotsky was thrown out of the Communist Party and exiled.
Trotsky arrived in Mexico in 1936 and lived in Mexico City in the Blue House, which was the residence of Diego Rivera and Frida Kahlo.
Trotsky was too prominent, too opinionated, and too well admired the world over to go into a quiet retirement. He gave interviews, he wrote, he published, he remained squarely in the public eye.
Trotskyism, Trotsky's interpretation of Marxism, grew in popularity.
At a certain point, Trotsky's criticism couldn't be tolerated anymore. Trotsky was indeed becoming a hero, an alternative, not only for other European countries and would-be socialist revolutionaries, but even an object of fond memory and an alternative path to Stalin in Soviet Russia.
On the orders of Joseph Stalin, Leon Trotsky was killed on August 21st, 1940, while exiled in Mexico.
Trotsky's head was smashed in by an ice pick. A Spanish socialist hired assassin loyal to Soviet Russia ended Trotsky's life so brutally. Trotsky lives on as a martyr and a symbol of what might have been. This was the true son of the revolution, the true heir to Lenin, who was never given a chance.
Okay, so a little bit. Let's see. Past that. Come on. There we go. But yeah, so Leon Trotsky. He was. Oh, why you start over? That's stupid. All right. Trotskyism. There we go. Trotsky was, as I put up here, a military genius. He's the one that wins the Russian Civil War for the communists. He's also a very big communist intellectual. And he believed in the idea of perpetual or permanent revolution. This Trotskyism, this idea that the revolution, to be successful, required that the revolution continued. It's not just like, hey, we got Russia to be communist. Spike the football, we are done, comrades. No, it's like, no, we can't the communism is a worldwide, it's workers of the world unite, not workers of Russia unite. And it said, therefore, it has to keep going. He, like I say, he was an intellectual and probably the guy everyone thought would be the next leader of the Soviet Union. But then we got this other guy, Joseph Vissarionovich Saakashvili. Look at Emily, he was young and hot. But yeah, who takes on the nickname Stalin. That's actually not his real name. Joseph Stalin. Stalin means man of steel. Born in Georgia, not that one, the other one. Poor country of Georgia. It's got like 1,000-year rich history. Everyone's like, Stalin was born there. It's like, shut up. But yeah, his mom wanted him to become a priest. He didn't become a priest. Yeah, just a bit. But Stalin will start to compete in power with Lenin, with Lenin. Now, one of the big things we're going to talk about, he was, like they mentioned in the video, a party secretary, which was huge. It wasn't a high position, but it helped get people jobs within the Soviet government. So even though that might not be a big position, like hiring manager, it was huge because he could then make sure that people were loyal to him. People that weren't Trotsky's friends, or at least it's like, you'll remember why you're in this job. But here you can see a picture of Lenin and Stalin in happier times. Back when they were just a couple of comrades just fighting off, right? And well, Stalin can match. It's like, yeah, you got time with him, I got time with him. Look at that. Look at Stalin all sitting there next to Lenin like they had good times. Here's the difference, though. Yeah. That's a real photo. That's a fake photo. Stalin had that made up. Stalin's not actually there. So, not bad for Photoshop. No, this was a way though. It's supposed to go, look at me and Vladimir. We used to be like this. Or we used to be like this. He had a kind of higher pitch voice. Wasn't a big guy. We can make fun of it. You do that once. But here's the things that Lenin really thought about Stalin. Comrade Stalin, having become general secretary, has great power in his hands, and I'm not sure that he always knows how to use that power with sufficient caution. He also said, Comrade Stalin is rude. He did not trust Stalin to be the next leader. So he's got all that going against him, but he's able to rise to power. And like I said, big part of that is the fact that he was the general party secretary. He could get people to go with him. He was also popular with his idea, which is the exact opposite of Trotsky, which I can't remember if we go into later, but it might be. Communism. Make sure I got the right term. Oh, no, socialism. Excuse me. Not that, I know, it's tomato, but it's the right term. Socialism in one country. Whereas Trotsky, which you could argue was the more true Marxist idea of, no, the revolution continues till it's worldwide. Stalin's like, nope, socialism here in Russia, we did it, plant the flag on the moon. Wait, that's not us. But still, yeah, we did that. That's the idea. By the way, there are other people who are kind of like vying for power, and Stalin just gets rid of them. So in the end, you have this hardliner propagandist like Stalin, or you got this propagandist who's able to really bring people over. Like I said, he wasn't the orator of Lenin, he wasn't the intellect of Trotsky, but he was good at planning meetings. He was good at running a government. Well, not good at running a government. He was kind of a terrible person. But he knew how to make a government work. So eventually, he comes to power. And Trotsky is kicked out of the country. Especially, too, because at one point, Trotsky called him the Soviet Bonaparte. Or called him the Soviet Napoleon, which was not a popular phrase. So he was exiled and sent to Mexico. And while in Mexico, where he lived for a number of years, he continued his call for a worldwide revolution. Meanwhile, Stalin's making sure people disappear here and there. In August of 1940, one ice axe to the head later, and that to the head later, Trotsky is no more, and now Stalin is in power. So there we go. Stalin is now the dictator of the Soviet Union. And you know what? There was an element of it under Lenin, but you want to get into the totalitarianism, you really have to look to Uncle Joe. Because now we have Stalin in charge. And there is no one who's better at being a dictator than Joseph Stalin. He's the man of steel after all. All right, I'm not going to keep doing that. But yeah. I mean, don't forget, this is the same guy who one time, during World War II, his son got captured, and he would not trade for him to get back. Yeah, his son was like I'm going to use American terminology. His son was like a major in the military, and they captured him, and the Germans are like, you want your son back? We want General so-and-so back. And Stalin's like, I'm not trading a general for a major. It's like, thanks, Dad. So yeah, Stalin. But yeah, you can kind of get a little bit of his, stop it. Let's get a little bit of his Stalin-y ways. Look at that. For example, you can see photos here. That guy was popular. Later on, not popular. And so they just take him out of the photo. maybe he crossed Stalin some way. This was a great example too. And this is a good example of totalitarian censorship. There's the photo as it started, then it became that, then it became that bottom right or left, and then with the bottom right eventually, just Stalin, it's all you'll need. So, like I said, Stalin believed this was his slogan, socialism in one country. In other words, we don't need to worry about continuing the revolution. We will be the communist example, then the world will eventually come to it. Now, don't get me wrong. Let's not pretend the Soviet Union is really one country. It's a lot of countries. Because now we're taking modern Russia, Ukraine, and somewhere else, Poland, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Georgia, so all those countries. So one country is kind of a misnomer. But that was the idea. And the thing is, though, even though it is multinational, he will continue a very czarist policy of Russification. The idea is that even though there are 11 different republics of the Soviet republics, they're going to have to be Russian. The Uzbeks and Ukrainians might have their own language, but they need to really adopt Russianness.
Is that why a lot of the countries have the Russian writing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of them come out of the Slavic era, so they're going to have similarities too in that regard. All right. And, of course, he's going to have a command economy. What do you think is meant by a command economy? What do you think is meant by a command economy? All right. Well, first, I'll explain it. There are two types of economies when it comes down to it. Market versus command. You guys live in a market economy. Who makes a decision for Vons to increase the number of breads they bake in any given day? Themselves. Based on the market, right? If something doesn't sell, they'll sell less of it, or they'll lower their prices. A command economy is where the government dictates all aspects of business. All economic decisions are made through government officials, not through the open hand of the market. And Marxism, by definition, is a command economy. And you'll see that with Stalin's 5-year plan. This is a very common thing among dictators as well. They always have a blank year plan or some kind of plan. Hitler will have the 4-year plan. Mao had the Great Leap Forward, and that one went really bad. But there's the idea. It's time for the Soviet Union to advance. So in 1928, Stalin announces the 5-year plan to make the Soviet Union an industrial giant. Because before the revolution, was Russia at the top of its industrial game? No. That's one of the reasons why it lost to Japan, right? Because Japan was outpacing it. So he's like, okay, the USSR was good at making dresses, but dresses aren't going to defend us against our enemies and make us a great power. So the government takes total control of the economy, of farming. And there are some successes. In essence, Stalin does achieve his goal. The Soviet Union goes from a country that you would really say is more farm-based to a leading industrial power. By 1937, the Soviet Union is the world's second largest industrial power. So within 10 years, he did achieve that goal. And there was 0% unemployment. But that's what command economies do. That's one of the things they always argue. Everyone has a job. Problem with that, though, is that means you're not also making any advances, too, in technology because nothing's replacing it. He also did create some social securities. He had public schools for the first time. Transportation improved. There was more houses as well. There was better housing and apartments. A little jumping ahead. One of the problems with the Soviet Union, by the time the 1980s come around, they have their problems. It's also the same transportation and housing. So 50 years later, it hasn't improved at all. And indeed, though, 1931, there's it's called the Class of 31. A lot of the later leaders of the Soviet Union, like Brezhnev, come out of this time period. So there's a lot of successes. At no cost whatsoever. Okay, there were major costs. Life and limb were lost in accidents and overworking. People had housing, but they're usually in overcrowded apartments. A problem you're going to see for the entire Soviet story, and that's one of the things that really notes the Soviet Union towards its end, lack of consumer goods. Yeah, they're building machines of war and missiles and things like that, but they don't have toasters available, kind of thing. This is where you think about the bread lines of the Soviet Union, where, yeah, everyone could get food, but they had to wait in a long, long line and maybe not get it that day. Women also were suffering because women were working now because the Soviet Union is not sexist. You'll give it that, because it believes sexism is a sign of capitalism, and therefore everyone's equal. The problem is that's the official government policy. At home, women were still working, or women were working in the factories and then going home and having to do the work at home. And overall, this was not good for the environment. The air was not good. Another area you saw change was agricultural collectivization. No more small farms. Big government-owned farms where no one owns the farm work. All right. All the farm was brought under government control. And that was the idea. He wanted the peasants to farm on either state farms where they work for the government, a farm owned by the government, or collective farms where it's owned by the whole area of that society. And the idea was they wanted them to put them to work because they needed them to grow grain so they can feed the workers in the cities. And they wanted to also sell grain abroad, which they actually did do. They actually sold grain during the Great Depression as a way of going, look at our system, it works. Did they have enough grain to sell? No, but they sold it anyway. And also they bring bureaucracy to the farming. It's pretty much what it was. It was government workers meet farmland. And the idea was they didn't want another economic crisis like they had in the 1920s where tens of millions of people died. And what they ended up doing was creating a system where tens of millions of people died. In some ways it's ironic. It's like Stalin returned them to serfdom in many ways. All right, going back to, we're going to do this idea. You have to work on this farm and you can't leave it. You mean like a serf when the Tsars did it? No. Free Soviet comrade. But yeah. How did it work? Well, let's take a look at it. In 1928, they produced 73.3 million tons. But thanks to Stalin's plan, in 1934, they produced 67 million tons of grain. Now, I'm no math expert, but I'm pretty sure that's less. Yeah, they produced less grain. The number of pigs dropped. The number of cattle dropped. The number of sheep and goats, almost went down to 2/3. So yeah, it didn't work. And meanwhile, the population's increasing by 20 million people at this time. So you've got less food and more mouths to feed, which led to massive deaths. You also have what's called the liquidation of the kulaks. These were wealthy farmers. Because what was happening, a lot of peasants, it's like, why aren't we growing more crops? Well, some peasants were growing what they could and hiding it because they're like, I don't want to give this away. I need to feed my family. So he blamed the wealthy farm owners. He took away their land. He had many of them killed or sent to labor camps. But indeed, you have these terrible famines. One of them example was the Ukrainian famine. One of the reasons why Ukraine and Russia have a little bit of a problem with each other. It was the idea they took away grain from people. I find that you'll take away your grain if you're trying to hide it, which resulted in the deaths of 5 to 8 million people in 1932, 1933 in Ukraine. But as Stalin put it, when you cut down a forest, splinters will fly. It's like, so some people are going to get hurt, but hey, you know what? It's for the good. Yeah. What was the other line from Stalin? If one person dies, it's a tragedy. If a million people die, it's a statistic. Just kind of no one truth in that sadly. So let's keep looking at Stalin as the totalitarian leader. Like I said, there was very much a cult of the personality. Stalin was the all-knowing and all-seeing father of the people. There were pictures of Stalin in everyone's home. Uncle, the boss, you love Uncle Joe. Uncle Joe is your friend. And don't you dare say one bad thing about him. I mean, little spoiler, going to World War II. During World War II, Stalin gave the general order, the not one step back. Now, I gotta keep doing my research on this one. I still can't tell if this is technically Stalin's fault, which, don't get me wrong, Stalin's usually at fault for something. This might not have been what he said, but during World War II, when the Nazis and the Soviets were fighting, he said, the Soviet Union will not take one step back. We are not retreating. We are fighting the Nazis, and we will not take one step back. What that in turn meant, now I don't know if Stalin wanted this to be the plan. He might have just liked it, though. They made that a policy. That's right, not one step back. So if Soviet troops started to retreat, they were shot instantly. Like they would have them charge at the Nazis, and behind them, they would be machine guns waiting. And the idea is either you break through that line or you die, because you turn around, we'll shoot you. And that's exactly what they did. Because Stalin said not one step back. I wasn't Solzhenitsyn, I thought it was, but I think it was someone else. He one time went to prison. He was arrested because it was before a battle during World War II, and he said, all right, men, this battle is going to be a hard one. There's going to be a lot of us who probably will suffer and die, but we will be victorious. We can take this town. We will win this battle. And he got arrested for that because Stalin said the battle would be easy and they would overtake them. How dare you disagree with Stalin? Yeah, that's the problem with cult of personalities. But yep, he was obviously a radical ideology. I mean, you saw already he was cutting people out of the pictures. Obviously, the artwork is all about Stalin. He had, of course, his secret police forces. By 1954, you had all these different, the Cheka, which was more before Stalin, the NKVD, eventually everyone's favorite, the KGB, which is like the FBI, CIA, and Gestapo rolled all into one little fun little package of, hey, someone's knocking at the door, you go get it. No, you go get it. But yeah, Vladimir Putin, current president of Russia / Russian beefcake, at least that's how he sees himself, was a former member of the KGB, for example. There's a picture of when Ronald Reagan, the president, went to Moscow on a state visit, and there's like a bunch of tourists around him, and one of them looks a lot like it might be Lenin. Or not, maybe not Lenin, Putin. That Putin was there as a dad with his kid as a tourist, but he was just there to keep an eye on Reagan. It's possible. And of course, purges. That was the thing Stalin did. Purging people from the Soviet Union who are problems, saboteurs, wreckers. They would give their confession, there would be a show trial, and then they would be punished. Could be murder. Execution was not out of the case. But by 1939, so within 15 years of Stalin becoming leader, 8 million Soviets were sent to work camps in the Gulag system. Or as with this book, the Gulag Archipelago. And it was a thing of terror, because there was no there was no right to vote, no private letters. Everything you wrote could be opened at any time. No freedom of the press, no way to, better not grumble. Why is bread so expensive? Why do you hate Uncle Joe in the Soviet Union? Off to you go. But it was like internal exile. I mean, that's saying Russia's massive and you could be out in the middle of nowhere. You could escape. There's no fences. You're in the middle of a work camp, but where are you going to go? But that's where you went. You went to forced labor, where living conditions were brutal. You would often face trial and retrial. Many people were worked to death. Now, these aren't like this. These are not Nazi death camps where people were gassed or anything like that. But they're not exactly pleasant experiences either. And we want to look a little bit at our friend Alexander Solzhenitsyn. Gulag Archipelago. Here's my copy of it. It's actually an abridged version, sadly, but one of the copies of it. Solzhenitsyn, one of the brilliant writers of the 20th century. He won the Nobel Prize for literature for this. There's also, if you're ever interested in this era, he wrote a short book called A Day in the Life of Ivan Denisovich, which is literally one day at a gulag, where you follow Ivan Denisovich from when he wakes up to when he goes to bed that night. And it's just a short little book, and it's a good one. But Solzhenitsyn was a man who lived through the Gulag Archipelago. And first of all, who knows what an archipelago is? You know what that is? That's when you have like a group of islands, like what's his name? Darwin came up with his theory of natural selection. That's the Galapagos Archipelago, where you have various small islands close together. And that's the idea. This is like the Gulag Archipelago. It's all these islands within the middle of the Soviet Union.
Like Polynesia would be like an archipelago?
Not quite, because Polynesia is so massive, because it's like that whole region, but there are archipelagos within Polynesia, yes.
So would Hawaii be one?
Yeah, I think you could almost call Hawaii one, definitely, because it's like a little serious island. But yeah, he was arrested. I can't remember. I think he criticized the war effort one time, and his letter got read, because that's what happened. Point of fact, my wife's grandmother, who lived through Nazi Germany, for the rest of her life, like whenever they get letters from her, they would be taped up. Like every letter would be like super taped. And my wife's father, may he rest in peace, would always go, "Ma, the war's over. Nazis are gone." I know. But still, till the rest of her life, she'd tape up those because that was maybe the better way. Like they might just let it go. But he wrote about the experience, and he's got some great lines. And I love, here we'll read a little bit, and that's him there. I remember, but I was really mad because I remember the day he died, it was like not the front news. The front news that day was that Dumbledore evidently was gay. It's like, yes, that's the important stuff. A fictitious wizard's sexuality. That's what I want to hear more about than one of the greatest writers of the 20th century. But whatever, the news stinks. But here we go. The universe has many different centers as there are living beings in it. Each of us is the center of the universe. So, which makes sense, right? there's only one universe, but each of us are the center of our own little universe, right? You're the star of your story. I mean, remember, it's always weird, right? No one sees what you see, you know? What you see out. I don't know what I look like teaching, and God knows I don't want to know. You have your own, it's weird, right? I'm thinking something right now, you're thinking something right now, but it's not the same thing. It's just those weird things. We're all the center of our own little universe. But that universe is shattered when they hiss at you. You are under arrest. So in other words, they tell you in the Soviet Union, you're under arrest, your universe just collapses. If you're arrested, can anything else remain unshattered by this cataclysm? But the darkened mind is incapable of embracing these displacements in our universe, and both the most sophisticated and the veriest simpleton among us, drawing on all life's experience, can only gasp out, me? What for? And this question, which though repeated millions and millions of times before, has yet to receive an answer. So he's like, yeah, people get arrested, their universes collapse, and they ask why. He's like, no one ever finds out, but they ask. Because he's like, even though he's like, it's a stupid question. You shouldn't ask. He's like, but we can't help it. We can't, the thought of our universe exploding does that to us. We'll look at a little more of his book in a bit. But he's also got one of my favorite lines about humanity. And he says this. Gradually, it was disclosed to me that the line separating good and evil passes not through states, not between classes, nor between local parties either. And we'll back that up. So in other words, people always talk about what's good and who's bad. He's like, well, it's not states. During World War I, that was the thought, right? There's the goodies and the baddies. That's where the line of good and evil is. The goodies are the Allies and the baddies are those German sinking ships, which wasn't good, but he's like, no, that's not the line between good and evil. Well, what would the communists say? Classes. There's the rich that are bad, there's the poor that are good. Don't get me wrong, poor people are usually nicer in there. It's amazing. Watch homeless people begging share with each other. They'll do it all the time. It's amazing. I saw a video recently where a guy walked up to a guy panhandling and asked for $1, and he gave it to him. Because he's like, that was really nice of you. And he gave the guy $500 and after that, that's a really cool video. I'm like, that's not the least common thing I've seen. In Long Beach, I watch them and then gather together and just share food around with each other. He's like, but even then, that's not the line that separates good and evil. Political parties, right? It's them Republicans, it's them Democrats, right? It's them Whigs or whatever. Nope. So where is the line that separates good and evil? He said right here, but right through every human heart and through all human hearts. Every human heart has the line between good and evil. All human hearts and every human heart. Every human being has good and evil in them. And he said that line shifts inside us. It oscillates with the years. And even with the hearts overwhelmed by evil, one small bridgehead of good is retained. And even the best of all hearts, there remains an uprooted small corner of evil. Let's take someone like Adolf Hitler. We'll agree Adolf Hitler is probably one of the worst evil people that ever lived. I think we can agree to that. But when he was born, it wasn't like he came out of the womb like, no, he was a baby. And at that point, that line was pretty, evil was pretty small probably in his heart, if it existed. He was a baby. Could have been cute. I don't know. I've seen the pictures. He's okay. Then let's fast forward to 1945. By then, he's a pretty evil guy. But you know what? Even then, as evil as he was, there's still a small part of his heart. He was nice to his dog. He loved that dog.
Yeah, he was vegan.
He was a vegetarian. Yeah. Yeah. Last meal he ate was vegetarian spaghetti. Just FYI. Yeah, actually, that's true. Yeah. It wasn't the last thing they put in his mouth, but that was bad. Actually, it was up to his head. Anyway, but even then, he wasn't the worst person. And same thing, if you think about your grandma, or I don't know, maybe you're like, it's like not my grandma. It's like, okay, so think about the greatest person Fred Rogers, Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers. Mr. Rogers is like a saint, all right? There will be 12 apostles around Jesus and Mr. Rogers, all right? And even in his good heart, there was still a little corner of evil that could exist, and it could oscillate. I know he used to fart to make his wife laugh, but I don't know if that's evil, which is just weird to think of Mr. Rogers doing that. But yeah, I love this quotation, because it's 100% true. The line between good and evil is not us versus them. It's me versus me. We all have lines between good and evil in our heart, and it can oscillate. The thing is, we try to I love that. We try to uproot evil. The idea that it takes root and grows. You try to pull it out, but you can't always. But that's the Soviet Union, my friends, in a nutshell. As you can see, under Stalin, it turns full totalitarian, and will be that way. We're going to read a little more of the Archipelago book. I'm going to stop the recording. Tomorrow, we will look at fascist Italy a bit, so we'll do that tomorrow.